Welcome to the Stop Ruining My Childhood podcast, a sometimes nostalgic, sometimes cynical look back at pop culture. Join us as we revisit movies, cartoons, and live-action TV of the 80s and 90s and ask the question, does this hold up or did I just ruin my childhood? My name is Megan.
And I'm Steve.
And today we are talking about He-Man. Before we get started, this is our first episode that we're recording, and we wanted to talk a little bit about why we wanted to do this podcast and why we named it Stop Ruining My Childhood. So basically, this kind of came about from two different things. The first is that Steve and I are married, and we had very different childhoods. Was that maybe how you would put it?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say we had definitely very different childhoods. I had a little bit more open childhood, and you had a little bit more of a secluded.
I was very sheltered
childhood. Yeah, I would say so.
I was very sheltered. Now, I will say, my parents, if they're listening, I had a wonderful childhood. Thank you so much. But yeah, so Steve and I have very different childhoods, and yet we have all of these, like, sometimes similar and sometimes very different memories of pop culture. So, like, there were shows that I was not allowed to watch that Steve watched and I watched, like, in high school. And there are other things that we both really loved and enjoyed. So what very often happens is that one of us will be thinking back in the past and looking back nostalgically, and the other person will kind of ruin it. And so very often we say to each other, stop ruining my childhood. And then we thought, well, what if we had a podcast where we talked about all those things, and we said, let's look at some cartoons and TV shows and movies and ask the question, like, do these hold up? The other reason is because, if you look at the news, a lot of times people throw around terms like boomer and millennial and Gen Z, and Gen X gets left out of that a lot. Now, if you're not Gen X, you can still enjoy this show, but really our childhoods, what we're looking at are basically very end of the 1970s till like maybe 1999, maybe 2000, but most of it'll be in that middle pocket. 80s and 90s, yeah. 80s and 90s. Maybe a few things on the edges, but for the most part, 80s and 90s. So,
before we get started, we should say this is a warning. Do not try this at home. This is like the worst thing you could do is to take cherished, beloved memories of your childhood and then look at them from a nostalgic, somewhat cynical adult lens and realize that they're not the rainbow-colored glasses memories that you had.
Yeah, I think, or watch along with us. Like, that's the other option. So that's basically the question. The question is, does this hold up, right? And we have so many things, and He-Man is one of them, which we're going to get into in a minute. He-Man is one of them. We have so many things that are rebooted, remade, sequels. The Ghostbusters movie just came out, right? They're having another Scream. It's 25 years since the first Scream, which is like crazy to me. And they did 2 reboots of He-Man, which we're going to talk about. But yeah, that's another thing. Like, I think a lot of times people are revisiting this stuff and kind of trying to remake it for a new generation, and also sometimes for the people who loved it. So before we get started, every time we're going to have like a nostalgic snack, and today, if you can hear that shaking, it is Pop Rocks. So
this episode is brought to you by Pop Rocks, the candy that possibly could kill you, just like it killed Mikey. Yeah,
not officially, too. That's not like an official plug, and especially if I put these Pop Rocks in my mouth and I like hate them.
If you guys remember, Megan, you probably remember, but for the longest time, there was the urban legend that Mikey from Life cereal had died drinking Pop Rocks and Coke.
That he put Pop Rocks in his Coke, and he ate both. And I think he I'm assuming he's still alive. I think he's like a Hollywood agent or something.
No, Mikey is John Gilchrist, and he's still very much alive. But he didn't do much acting after it, so people just assumed he disappeared. And this urban myth came up, and he was asked about it once, and he's like, I have no idea why that came about. He said, to be honest, interestingly enough, he doesn't even remember doing the Life cereal commercial.
Oh, because
he was
so
like
little.
3.5.
Yeah.
But somehow,
Like
for the longest time, I remember as a kid hearing, "Don't drink Pop Rocks with Coke or you'll die."
I remember as a kid not being allowed to have Pop Rocks. Again, that sheltered childhood. I want to say right off the bat, as Steve's eating his, he's got grape, I've got strawberry. The smell is quite intoxicating. Amazing. Oh, and I heard the other day how Pop Rocks came to be, so this is actually kind of cool. While yours are dissolving, I don't want both of us to just be sitting here with
Just a ticket.
So they were actually trying to find a way to...
Hold on.
No, that's so gross.
There you go. Maybe
the sound
I
of
just
Pop
put
Rocks.
the microphone next to my Pop Rocks mouth.
They were trying to find a way to put the bubbles that are in pop, the
Carbonation?
I don't drink pop. Sorry, yeah, the carbonation into Kool-Aid, and basically accidentally discovered Pop Rocks because by the time people were making the Kool-Aid, it was flat.
That makes sense.
So the guy picked up a bunch of the little rocks here and tossed them in his mouth and was like, "Oh, it's just this." Like, you don't try to get people to then. If you remember, back in the early '80s, and I don't know if it's still now, but Kool-Aid used to come just in a powder, like a
just
keg,
a powder,
literally a powder keg, and you would have to sometimes mix sugar in. So my babysitter, whose house I would go to before and after school, she would put like extra shit. Like, it called for like 3 cups, and she would put like 4.
If you were a hooligan or a juvenile delinquent like me and the kids that I hung out with, you would get yourself a pack of Kool-Aid and then cut lines with it and snort it.
Oh, no.
Which is not healthy.
Yeah, right. But
when you're a kid, you think it's the greatest thing.
Oh, my God. Okay. This is the best. I have to say, I have had these as a kid a couple times. This is fantastic.
I told you, it's amazing.
So, we'll see if He-Man holds up, but I have to tell you, Pop Rocks, we're judging things today on juice boxes, yes. Juice boxes. Every time we'll have kind of a different criteria, but Pop Rocks, for me, 5 out of 5 juice boxes. 100%.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would give Pop Rocks 5 out of 5 juice boxes.
We're going to take a pause here, and when we come back, we'll talk about our memories, and then we'll go into the full review and recap.
So getting into He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
So talk about your memories of He-Man, and then I'll talk about mine a little bit.
My memories of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe were coming home from school, and it was on TV. He-Man was on at like 2:30, 3 o'clock, probably somewhere in that area. And so it was on, I think, 4 days a week. I'm not sure if they did Fridays was different, but it was on at least 4, maybe 5 days a week, I recall, coming home.
What about Saturday morning?
You know, where I was and when I was watching He-Man, I don't recall it on Saturday mornings. There was a whole different group of Saturday morning cartoons. But I could look forward to He-Man. He-Man and G.I. Joe were after school. And I mean, I just have great memories of He-Man. I loved He-Man. I had some of the action figures. It's one of those things that when I think of cartoons, that pops into my head.
This podcast is supported by its creators
and listeners like you.
Help keep our show ad-free by visiting our website, stopruiningmychildhood.com.
There you can find links to our social media.
And this very podcast you're currently listening to.
Both Megan and I are authors, and you can find links to our books on our About page.
And on our Watch With Us page, you can find videos and links for all the shows and movies we discuss on the podcast.
And more importantly, links to buy the nostalgic snacks we review as well.
We also post bonus content about once a month.
So like, subscribe, and follow.
For a small independent podcast like ours, it really does make a difference. Thanks. And now, back to the show.
Along with, like I said, G.I. Joe, probably Transformers. Those are the cartoons I remember. Thundercats, Voltron, but He-Man is definitely in the top 5 that I can think of.
And we're definitely going to talk about all of those later.
Now, interestingly enough, as a girl, because I think of He-Man as a boy cartoon, what was your experience with He-Man?
Yeah, so mine's a little bit different. It's definitely... my brother is 4.5 years younger than me, and my earlier memories of He-Man are like at my babysitter's, like, boys would be watching it, and we would, like, go play Barbies in the other room because it was on after school, right? And so, but even then, I think, like, kindergarten for me, Steve's a couple years older than me, not by much, but a little bit, enough that at that age it matters, right? When my brother, being 4.5 years younger, it was the toys. It was all about the toys. So I think, if I'm recalling correctly, he had the castle and some of the figures, He-Man, Skeletor, like those, but like used, right? In the way that a lot of our toys, my parents are both teachers, so they were always getting toys from people. And he would just be like in his room playing with them. And I don't know, by that point, you know, the cartoon that we learned, which was surprising to me, was only made for 2 years, but they made like 140 episodes in those 2 years.
They made a lot, yeah.
So it might have been on at that time in syndication, and I'm sure if I had asked him, I'm sure he watched it, but I think for him it was more about the toys.
I was going to say that, but you know, it doesn't surprise me that Tim would have gotten like hand-me-down He-Man, because I remember, I mean, He-Man went for a long time toy-wise, but like, I feel like I was watching He-Man in its prime, and Tim is like 6 years younger than me.
Right.
It means he was 1 when it first came out.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the thing. By the time he was like 4 or 5 playing with the toys, I don't know that it was on or as big of a thing.
Right.
And that's actually, by the way, if you are interested in He-Man, there's a great special on Netflix called The Toys That Made Us. We're not sponsored officially by Netflix either, but just like we're not officially sponsored by Pop Rocks, though we could be. I would sell the heck out of Pop Rocks.
Yeah, Pop Rocks, if you're still out there, look us up.
But definitely look us up. The Toys That Made Us kind of explains that the toy came first, and that's actually when a couple episodes from now, we're going to talk about Strawberry Shortcake, and that was actually cards before the shows. But I thought it was so fascinating that the toys came first, because for me, that's my memory, is just basically just the toys. And also, you would think that I might have watched She-Ra, but I was like, no. That's still, I was a really girly girl. But I also have particular tastes in types of animation that I like. And even as a kid, that style of animation I just didn't enjoy. So let's go into the episodes. We're going to talk about He-Man first.
We watched 2 episodes, and then we watched a quick one of the new
We watched one of the new reboots, and we also separately watched the Kevin Smith reboot, which we'll talk about very briefly, and not too long, so that we don't hear any ranting or cynicism. Yes. Although we are ruining people's childhoods.
That's my wife trying to keep me in check. So we didn't pick like the first episode or last. Because we watched them on YouTube now. Right. We just kind of chose 2 episodes that they had.
And I think you can find them on other streaming services. It's just not streaming services that we have currently. But there are a number of people who have uploaded things to YouTube, and that is where we found this show. So the first episode was Eternal Darkness. Do you want to kind of explain the plot? You want to run down the plot?
You know, to be honest, this was probably a great episode to start with, because I don't remember this episode at all. It's one of the few episodes that does not have Skeletor in it, which of course is the big main bad guy for He-Man, and he's not in this at all. Instead, they've got Dark Dream, who's some guy I never recall being a bad guy in He-Man.
It might have been the only episode he was in, for all we know.
Could have been the only episode. You know, it did still have Evelyn, who normally is like the second in command to Skeletor, but in this episode she's working for this Dark Dream guy who apparently has the power to influence nightmares on people.
Right, so he's been in prison. The episode starts with He-Man having a nightmare. He comes out of it. His cat is having a nightmare as well.
Cringer. You know, if you're going to come correct.
I almost called him Tigger. This is, again, my memories of He-Man. So Cringer's also having a nightmare. They come out of it. Then they show the King and the Queen having nightmares in separate beds, by the way, which was like so...
Yeah, but we'll get into that.
And then they realize that it must be this villain who has been in prison for a while, and now he's out. So now they have to get him again, basically. Right? So, first thoughts right off the bat, for me, there's 2 things. First, the person who was He-Man and Adam. Adam is the Prince Adam when he's not He-Man, right? When he's not transformed. I thought that the voice acting was really good. I was kind of surprised. He had different voices that he did for each side of that character, and it wasn't... I don't know how to put this other than, like, it wasn't cartoony, right? It, like, sounded like a real voice. And then my second thought, which I think I said out loud, was, wait, the cat talks? Because I have seen this, like I said, like, kind of in the background, and I don't think I've ever sat through a full episode. So that, the cat's voice is so ridiculous. So ridiculous. Yeah, but it was a really good premise, kind of like a Nightmare on Elm Street sort of thing.
I thought the voice acting was good too. Looking back on it now, like I said, I love the cartoon. Yeah. But I'll even say, to be honest, looking back on it, the animation's quite good.
Yeah, I want to kind of compare it later on to the two reboots, because the animation is quite different for all three of these. They had a couple times where, this is what I hate about this style of animation. Two things. One, that the women are very sexualized, which is one of the things I think that bothered me about it even as a younger kid.
Yeah, surprisingly, we're on different ends of the spectrum on that.
Yeah, and I mean, He-Man's sexualized too, in the, you know what I mean, with the big muscles and all of that. So you can't really say that it just goes one way. But I just don't. Yeah, I don't like that. And then the second thing is that they have a couple scenes like Scooby-Doo kind of animation where they're like looping it. So like they're running.
Yes.
And it's the same.
Yeah. And I'll say, I noticed that as an adult looking at it. There's a and this is probably has to do, as we just mentioned, probably has to do with the fact that they made like 140 episodes, right? They were cranking out these 20-minute episodes without the commercials in them.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of pieces where they're reusing cells.
But
you can tell, like every time he changes to He-Man, it's the same cells they're reusing, right?
Yes.
If they're running, they're using the same cell a few times over and over.
But I have to say the landscapes were amazing. They're very painterly, which was surprising to me. That what I mean by that is that if you do go back and watch it, the landscapes a lot of times they're up in the sky, flying on different vehicles and stuff. They look like watercolor paintings. Like, they're really, really well done. My other question... Oh, okay. So this is a question that, again, as somebody kind of ignorant of this show. So I knew the saying, by the power of Grayskull, I have the power, right? Which annoys me, too, because I hate when things rhyme, where the word rhymes with the same word. But anyway, like, why not by the throne of Grayskull? I have the... I don't know. But my thing is, it is Castle Grayskull.
Right.
And he's typically defending it from Skeletor.
Yes.
But by their very names, it seems to me that it's pretty clear who should be in that castle.
Well, you know, interestingly enough, originally I think they set it up that was supposed to be Skeletor's base.
Right, because like He-Man has a totally different castle.
But then with the whole the cartoon that came into play and trying to create a story, and actually even before the cartoon they were the little tiny comic books that came with the
they came with the toys.
With the toys. I think they started having to write a story around this, and it became, you know, Grayskull was where the power came from, and so He-Man had to defend that from Skeletor, who wanted the same power. He wanted to get the power that was in Grayskull. And then you had the sorceress, who turns into a bird. We didn't see her in this episode, but we see her in the next episode.
In the next one.
Right? She turns into a falcon. And so, because it's kind of part of the deal, if I remember right, she can't leave Grayskull unless she's in the bird form.
I feel like everybody can hear me eating more Pop Rocks right now.
But yeah,
I figured Steve was going to explain stuff.
It was great. It was interesting. But what I'll go into is some of the things that hit me was when we talk about story, right? I love it, and I remember these being phenomenal stories. As I'm looking back, you know, there was a few things that jumped out at me. You know, I thought that they also added Tabor in this episode, who was like another henchman under Dark Dream, and I've never seen Tabor ever before in any of the He-Man stuff either. And he was the guy who was like a sorcerer too.
Yeah.
And he had like this terrible like rhyming spell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So Tabor is like making up rhyming spells and kind of getting it wrong. And I think what they are doing there... Well, first I want to say, in terms of storytelling, and this kind of connects to Tabor, I liked that this is a cartoon that's very clearly for older kids. If you watch a lot of cartoons coming out now, they're either for adults or they're for very young children. Like things like Paw Patrol, the new Muppet Babies, which is just... that's a whole other podcast episode. But they're really kind of... a lot of them are based on learning, like not just a lesson at the end, but really like learning things like shapes, numbers, right? So I kind of was like, this is a cool cartoon that they try to put a lesson in at the end, which we'll talk about later, but really it's just the story, right? It's just for kids to enjoy the story and have fun with the story and in the world and with the characters, which I thought was cool. And I think what they're doing with Tabor is that Dark Dream is legitimately a scary figure, like Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street. Mm-hmm. I'm getting that right? It's Freddy, not Jason.
Yep, Freddy.
Okay. That's again a different when we come to our Halloween podcast. But I think that they try to lessen that a little bit with Tabor, to be like, but the bad guys are kind of doofuses and they don't know what they're doing, right? So that you're not kind of as afraid. Again, in terms of some of that storytelling and world building with the characters, I still don't know who Orko is. I watched 2 episodes of this show plus the 2 reboots. I'm not clear on what that is or what it does or anything.
Because Orko is a fool. He's the comic relief. I remember as a kid...
Is he an elf? Like,
he's like a wizard, and you never see his face.
Okay.
And he floats around. I will tell you, I remember as a kid being like, Orko's a fool.
Right,
like,
but they never
I didn't
explained.
like Orko as a child either, and I don't recall anyone who ever did. But the premise of this show, and in case those of you out there, if you're listening, that didn't watch this episode, right? The premise of it is that this Dark Dream guy escapes from this prison, and he can only really be at full power at nighttime. Mm-hmm. So he has this sidekick of his, Tabor, work with Eva Lynn to move the moon so it eclipses the sun so that it's dark all the time and he can then rule Eternia.
Right.
Things go wrong because Tabor really can't control this, and the moon starts coming towards the planet, and it becomes like a major, like... world-ending event, if it would be.
Which I think they even say to him, they're like, that, like, the planet would die, you would probably die with the planet. And he's like, I don't care.
One of the things that jumped out to me, too, in the logic aspect of this is that, if you recall, a few of them got captured. A few of the good guys were, Man-at-Arms was captured, Tila was captured, and the Sorceress came out as a falcon and got captured as a falcon. What really got me is someone said, well, the only one that has the power to stop this moon is the Sorceress, but she's in a falcon form and she can't let people know that that's her form. Like, that's her secret. And I remember going, wait a second. The Sorceress's secret that she's a falcon is more important than the entire planet being destroyed.
Yeah, there are a lot of logical things like that. I also, having never seen this, like, I don't know if I'd come into the pilot if they would explain things, but I doubt it. Because most of the kids watching probably had the toys and the comic books, but it's pretty clear to see who Tila is, right? She's Man-at-Arms' daughter, yep. And they're both kind of like royalty, like she would maybe be like a lady in waiting in court.
Yeah, Man-at-Arms is like the captain of the guard. And right. Tila is his daughter, so she's been raised up kind of as a...
So let's talk about the world building, too, because they have this whole fantasy thing, and there's a castle, and there's swords, and then they also throw in... Steve's going for more pop rocks here. Uh-huh. But they also then throw in these, like, flying vehicles all of a sudden, and I'm like, oh, wait. So, in some sense, it's confusing. In another sense, I really did... By the time we got to the end of the second episode, I liked that blend of science fiction and science fan. Like, it really is science fantasy, right?
It really
It's not
is.
fantasy and it's not sci-fi. Just pure. It really is a nice mixture. But with the Sorceress, I was like, who is this? Is she an immortal? There are people listening. This is why I'm ruining your childhood, because I know that somebody is getting angry at me right now.
Yeah,
but
I understand your pain.
Is she immortal? Also... We go through this episode, And then all of a sudden, He-Man's like, sorceress, we need you. And her face appears, and she's doing this, like, telepathy, and she's like, He-Man, I will fly to you in my form as a falcon. And I'm like, wait, she has telepathy? Like, to me, it kind of comes out of nowhere. So there are a number of things like that I was just kind of perplexed about. But also, I think, if you're a kid, you know, neuroplasticity is real, right? And you just kind of go with it. Yeah. And you don't, there's a lot less questioning. And, and we're here to analyze, obviously. So we're looking at things a little bit differently.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The king and the queen sleep in separate beds.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Man-at-Arms has no wife. And Tila looks suspiciously like the queen. Okay, I think there was some... now as an adult looking back, ruining my own childhood, I think there was some hanky-panky going on behind the scenes.
And you know that it doesn't work that way, though, right? Like, if like, Man-at-Arms was Woman-at-Arms and had, like, a daughter that looked like the king, that would make sense, but it doesn't work the other way.
She could have had this kid.
And they just, like, gave it away.
You don't remember, but when She-Ra comes around years later, all of a sudden the queen had twins, Adam and She-Ra's character.
Oh.
And we never heard about this. So the queen has shown that she can cover up a baby, okay? I don't just...
So now we get to the point where if there are fans listening, they're going to turn it off, because I thought that She-Ra and He-Man were together.
No, they're twins.
I didn't know that part. I didn't know that part of it. Okay. I think now that I'm thinking of it, I think at one point somebody gave me a used She-Ra on did she have a horse?
She had a flying horse, yeah.
Was it like horse. A white horse?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I think I might have had that. And I probably... like mix that with my Barbies. But anyway, so let's talk about the lesson at the end. The lesson at the end, which was, if you have a bad dream, you can...
It was about bad dreams.
Yeah, you can
Everyone
go tell
has bad dreams, and if you have a bad dream, don't be afraid to tell an adult.
Which is a nice lesson. The lesson at the end of the second episode, which we're going to talk about in a second, Keeper of Ancient Ruins, I said to Steve, I look at Steve and I go, wouldn't it be hilarious if the lesson has to do with you should go to museums? And sure enough,
that was the lesson.
Was the lesson. Knowledge is also power. One way of getting knowledge is to go to local museums. I was like, I almost cried. I was laughing so hard. So the Keeper of the Ancient Ruins was our second episode. And here we have, had some other questions, but we have a professor character who looks exactly like Albert Einstein.
Just like Albert Einstein.
It's basically Albert Einstein in cartoon form.
This is like when Scooby-Doo used to have celebrity guests on the cartoon.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like here.
And they are trying to translate an ancient book which wakes up robots that are 1,000 years old, which is really, again, some interesting world building.
We had no idea in Eternity because technology and fantasy seem to go hand in hand.
In Eternity, yeah. Yes. So there's 1,000-year-old robots. They're woken up. And then I forgot what happened after that.
They wake up and they're supposed to protect this book, and they think that Man-at-Arms and Albert Einstein are trying to, like, steal it. And so they go after them, and... these robots have the ability to freeze people in time.
Right. And also one of them is injured. And so they're trying to help that robot. And the robots seem very wary of humans. Like as if there was some kind of human-robot war 1,000 years ago.
But we never hear anything about that.
We never know anything about that. And then we come to Tila and He-Man have taken a vehicle and it's crashed. Right, so they're trying to repair it, and in the meantime, Trapjaw comes in, who is, in my notes I put, a lot more ridiculous than Deep Dark. Also, the 1,000-year-old robot remembers He-Man from this Bible. Like, he says, oh yes, He-Man, we know of you from ancient scripture, and then it's never talked about again, either. So we don't really know... have there been other He-Mans? Is this a power like a sword that's passed down from one He-Man to the the Dread Pirate Roberts?
He's like the champion of Grayskull. So my assumption was, as an adult looking back now, that there's probably been champions before that have had the power of Grayskull, and that's what their connection is to He-Man.
Because my other possibility was that like he is the one foretold of in the ancient
that
scriptures.
could have been too, I guess. I don't know, but we really weren't. We weren't really going that deep, I don't think.
No, so Trapjaw, can you talk about him a little bit? Was he a big villain?
I mean, there was a lot of toys. Trapjaw was one of Skeletor's men. Again, we have no Skeletor in this episode,
right?
But we have Trapjaw, who is looking to impress Skeletor, and he sees Prince Adam and Teela in the Wing Raider, which, this is another thing. The Wing Raider was a great little cool vehicle. It's a flying vehicle. I had it as a toy, and one of my irritations, even as a child, was that the toy only fits one action figure, but in the cartoon, two people fit in the Wing Raider.
But then
I felt cheap.
Well, how would they get you to buy two of the Wing Raiders? If they let both
right, so they were trying to take advantage of me as a child, and I don't care for that.
Yeah, which you get if you watch that special on Netflix. That this whole thing is just like, how can we get the most money out of kids?
That's the other thing, though, too, is the toys came first. So the Wing Raider that only fits one was original. The cartoon, for no reason, added two people.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this. Was this in this episode or the last episode where they were on like, it looked almost like the Sea-Doos, the little like, but in the air.
That was the first episode. Yeah, they were on.
Those are really cool.
Yeah, they were like little. They were almost
like scooters, kind of, but for the sky.
They were for the sky. Yeah,
but they looked like those Sea-Doos.
They had little eagle heads on the front. Yep, and they were like, you know what they reminded me of? They look like. You're like Sea-Doos or jet skis, but they fly. And all they can remind me of is the movie Flash Gordon. They use something very similar to that.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the toys were like reused.
They were reused. Yeah, they took a lot of things.
But I keep having in my notes as well. Why does Teela not know? How does Teela not know? He-Man looks essentially the same, but with no shirt, but especially the cat. So. Cringer, does he have another name when he's transformed?
He's Battlecat.
Battlecat. So Cringer and Battlecat are both green cats with orange stripes.
And and just to point out, the only tigers that are green with orange stripes that we ever see in Eternia.
So that's the thing. So even if you were, this whole like Clark Kent Superman dynamic that both of these characters have. It is a lot like that. It's like taking off the glasses.
The same
he takes
build,
off the shirt.
the same blonde Prince Valiant haircut.
Yeah. Oh my god. The haircut. I, at one point, as all little girls do, I cut my own hair and I gave myself some really nice bangs. And I have very thick curly hair, so that the haircut did not work on me. I'll bob with bangs. And my mother was like, "You look like Prince Valiant." And I was like, "I don't know what that means."
She could have said you look like He-Man.
I think at one point she did. And she also said the little Dutch boy on the paint can. I don't know if you remember.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you remember Prince Valiant from the cartoon strips in the newspaper, taking that out with Silly Putty and all that.
The other thing about this episode, getting back to the robots, is the robots looked very similar to Rosie, the maid from the Jetsons.
Yeah.
And at Lockjaw's whole purpose here, Lockjaw is trying to capture them so that he can impress Skeletor. Again, just to cause more strife in the cartoon. They end up overcoming them, and that Adam is able to sneak away and turn into He-Man, save Teela.
Fix the robot.
The professor fixes the robot. The robots become their friends, and in all's well that ends well. The robots time freeze Lockjaw, and then He-Man takes him off to some work camp, which I never really heard of before either.
Now, in the midst of this, we are overlooking the highlight, I think, of this episode, and that is that a storm is a-coming.
Oh,
and He-Man takes his sword, creates a very large circle, and we're like, oh, was he going to do a spell? No. He creates a circle, stomps on the earth, makes a hole, and then tell the people what happened.
Yeah, he looks like he's drawing the circle with his sword,
yes.
But he cuts into the earth and makes like, I'd say maybe a 50-foot round circle.
About.
Opens it like a can.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
The thunderstorm clouds go into the earth, and then he closes and it's all done.
So I don't know if you can picture a circle with the can, like kind of, you're taking the lid off the can, right? You pop the can lid up, and it's kind of half sticking up. So the storm hits that, and then falls into the hole.
Yeah. Keeping in mind that this thing is only maybe 40, 50 feet in the air. And the storm cloud hits it.
Steve and I are both taking notes, and he turns around to look at me, and we're both like, I don't even know what just happened there. I have just traps a storm, ? And yet, at the same time, I have to say, I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I don't... Even as a kid, I did not like, and we're gonna, at some point, we'll get to, like, maybe Inspector Gadget, or a pup named Scooby-Doo, because Scooby-Doo came out in the 60s, but a pup named Scooby-Doo was, like, the remake. I don't like any show that's too formulaic, but especially some of these cartoons that would basically have the same plot over and over and over. So it was really surprising to me how, in some ways, original these plots are. Now, do you have a superhero type plot, good guy versus bad guy turning into the superhero, right? All of those tropes are there. But the story themselves of fighting a guy who's taking over your dreams, and him trying to make it dark. This story where, the Lockjaw thing is kind of, Trapjaw. Not Lockjaw. But the Trapjaw thing is really a side thing. The central thing is that there's an ancient text that robots are protecting. It's in this kind of museum thing, and they are concerned that these texts are going to be interfered with or used for the wrong purposes. So, it was a lot more original than I thought.
The other positive that I really liked about this episode specifically is when you think about it, the solution of the problem was fixed without violence.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, even the robot that was injured got injured by running into another robot. Mm-hmm. Now, Trapjaw has a gun, a laser gun, and he fires at people, but he never hits them. He's like a stormtrooper, apparently. But, or he fires and He-Man just blocks it with his power sword. But there's the robots kind of like freeze Trapjaw, and so there's no real violence in that. He's like in stasis. And then Man-at-Arms and Professor Einstein fix the robot and then talk to the robots and basically explain that they're peaceful, we have no mean to harm you, we don't want to take your stuff, and they solve the problem through talking instead of He-Man punching the problem away.
Right, yeah, they're trying to translate this text, and that's what they're there to do. You're right, yeah, so that is kind of interesting. And then we get this nice lesson about knowledge is power and go to museums.
Go to museums, yeah.
Which is one of our favorite things to do.
Now, these were forced lessons.
Yeah, they were definitely forced lessons.
The Coalition for Family Values said that basically any cartoons in the 80s that had violence or shooting or warfare or whatever had to have some sort of a moral at the end, which is why G.I. Joe also had a moral at the end.
Yeah, they reminded me of, I think these went on for quite a long time, too, because I remember one from Psych, and that was in the 2000s, but the NBC, The More You Know, little commercials, like, got junk in your trunk? That's making if you have too much things in the trunk of your car, that's making it run not as efficiently, and you could save gas by taking the junk out of your trunk. Yeah, and then it would be like, the more you know, ding. And that was the Psych one. Mm-hmm. But other little lessons like that they'd sprinkle sometimes throughout these shows. So that was kind of interesting. So that was He-Man, the original.
He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
Man and the Masters of the Universe. So the Kevin Smith reboot is Masters of the Universe Revelation. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they changed the name after the reviews came out, or if that was always the name.
I think they left. Yeah, I'm not sure.
So just briefly, as somebody who was not a fan of the original, I think the idea of having a passing of the torch from one character to another is a good way to reboot a series. I don't think that that's the worst way to go about things. But they did not do it the right way. in my opinion. So just for people who don't know, can you kind of just recap a little bit of what happened in the first episode?
The first episode, He-Man dies.
And so does Skeletor.
Right. Which is like the worst way to start a series. I understand the passing of the torch, but the cartoon is called He-Man. I mean, everyone tunes in to see He-Man.
Yeah, what's interesting, too, is that they talk about this so all of these are both on Netflix, and I don't want to keep harping on this Toys That Made Us show, but they talk about the fact that when they tried to expand the toys to more villains and more heroes and stuff, a lot of people didn't like that. They just wanted to be able to play with He-Man and Skeletor, and those sold out very quickly, so it was difficult for kids later on to get the original, too. And I also think that it was advertised the wrong way. And I think that if they had been upfront and they had said, we have a series, it's going to be called Masters of the Universe, it's based on the world in which He-Man lived, and then they start, just episode 2, and it's just Teela and Evelyn, I think they call her Evelyn instead of Evelyn. I think that would have been good. I did not like the animation. The backgrounds and the characters in the foregrounds did not mesh correctly. Mm-hmm. And my guess is that one of them was done maybe traditional and one was done computer. I'm not sure, but to me, visually, it didn't sync up.
I'm not going to go into a lot of it. I was taught if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Well, then we'll move on.
But I will say, I did have an issue in even the way that the characters were repainted a little bit. They obviously threw in a lot of characters that were traditional characters to kind of play off people's nostalgia, but then they went through quick transitions and changes very fast. Teela, who becomes the main character of the series for the most part, her entire attitude and personality change. And what really threw me off was even near the beginning of this first episode, He-Man dies, they come home, they tell the king and queen, who are crying, and Teela's upset that she's the only one that didn't know He-Man was Adam.
Yeah, she yells at the queen.
And she yells at these parents who just lost their son because her feelings are hurt. And it really just kind of turned me off.
And also, the king did not know.
He did not,
He did not. The queen apparently knew, but the king did not. The last note that I have on this is, I wanted to ask, who is this for? Because if you're going for a new audience, there are some things here. Cringer was like the comic relief in some ways. There was a fireworks show and Cringer was afraid of it and hiding under a table or something. And it seemed playing more to very younger kids. And then He-Man and Skeletor both die, which would not play to younger kids. And again, I think you have to know who your audience is. If you're going for a new audience of kids and maybe their parents watch, then fine. If you want to do an adult cartoon that's for people our age, right? People in their 30s and 40s, then you go for that target. But I think that it didn't know who its audience wanted.
And I think that's where the other He-Man remake jumps in.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Did you have I don't remember what they called it. I thought it was the Masters of the Universe.
Yes. So I think it's called Masters of the Universe. I just have Netflix reboot
2021. It was also rebooted. It was also done by Netflix around the same time that the Kevin Smith one was. But this one, it's like they decided we want to go for kids. And that's where they went. All of the characters are brought back. Teela, Adam, Duncan, who's Man-at-Arms, right? They brought in a few new ones. Crash. Cringer's there, but they're all pretty much kind of children, and they have been revamped.
And you can tell that this is definitely a show that's for 7 to 10.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? The kids are a little bit older, kind of, a lot of times they'll do that for what we call middle grade. In books, it's called middle grade. And then you would have, probably their parents might watch it too, but it's mostly for them. I think the computer animation, it's a little bit boxy. It looks kind of like an old video game, but that's part of that sort of nostalgic appeal. To me, it was a tiny bit boxy, but they have a larger emphasis on technology, which I think would also appeal to kids this age. So it starts with Teela, right? And she's trying to break in and steal something. And she has kind of like a digital map that's a mixture between again, magic and tech. So she's trying to steal something. You don't know what it is at first. We follow her, and then we see Adam, and he's with
the Tiger Tribe.
The Tiger Tribe.
Which is run by Cringer, who has no claws. I don't know why.
We don't know why. And there's a little cub, which is really cute. I don't remember the little cub's name.
I think they called him like Kitty or something.
Yeah, Kitty. So Kitty, but Tila has magic, and then eventually we realize that she has the sword. Adam gets the sword, he transforms into He-Man, and they basically fight the people who are trying to take the tigers.
Yeah, and you can tell they're also, whereas some of the other He-Man reboot was sort of shooting towards the nostalgic people that grew up with He-Man, but then unfortunately didn't really cater to their thoughts. This one is going for a very young audience, not only in the way it's animated and the fact that they're children, but even it has kind of an anime feel to it. The sword of power is oversized like a Final Fantasy or anime type of thing.
I think Final Fantasy, when I say boxy video game, that's what I'm thinking of. I'm not thinking of like, Mario Brothers. Right. But yeah, like a Final Fantasy type of look to it. And I really I thought the voice acting in this was great. I thought that the animation, again, not painterly like the original, but really intricate world building. You're in the jungle, you're in this place where Tila's trying to break in, really beautiful backgrounds. And I also really liked that, and this was kind of my favorite part, two things. That when Adam takes the sword, he actually has a full transformation. So he goes from this really skinny kid, who's probably like maybe 13. He bulks up, and now his head's a little tiny for his body.
But he becomes a man.
He becomes a real man with muscles and stuff. And so it's a much more believable transition that people wouldn't know his secret identity. Love it. I really liked that they had some strong female characters, but that it's still He-Man's show, right? I think that that's kind of cool to see, too.
It also has because it's for kids, too, and I think this is important, it has a teamwork feel, right?
Yes.
It's not only He-Man, but then he also could say, we have the power, and he changes his friends as well. Not as powerful as He-Man, but they're changed as well.
Yeah, and there are even... Here's what I think they did well. I think sometimes when shows try to do social justice stuff, they prioritize that over story. Here we have a little bit. Tila talks about how Adam's accent sounds like it's from he's an upper person and not a street level person. There seems to be some type of a feudal system, but that exists in this fantasy world, right?
Yes.
There are kings and queens and peasants and things like that. So showing the disparity, but still staying in the world building and having it be part of the story, rather than feeling like it's outside of the story. So I think I really appreciated that too. But it had kind of a Star Wars vibe. Man of Arms is not Tila's father, so far
he is not in this. Far
as we can tell.
He goes by Duncan, and he's about their age.
Yes.
They've added him to the group.
So, unless he's like Merlin and he's aging backwards, he is not Tila's father.
What I will say, too, that I liked about this, kind of on a parting word of this reboot piece, is whereas the Kevin Smith reboot, I watched the first episode, and that was it for me.
Yeah.
I was done, and it left a bad taste in my mouth. This one, even though it's more for kids... We watched the first episode, and then, to be honest, we watched another episode.
Yeah, we did.
I was like, okay, I'll watch more of this.
I actually wanted to watch quite a bit more, and by that point it was late, and we're like, well, we are old, so we need to go to bed now. But episode 1 stops on a cliffhanger. It made me want to watch episode 2. Episode 2 drew me in enough that I wanted to see episode 3. I haven't had time yet, but I think that it was a good way to take the nostalgia and to use that story in that world, but in a new way.
Yes.
So it felt less like bad fan fiction.
Yeah.
And more like a true rebooting. So... I think that recaps our recaps.
So now we get to our grading of juice boxes. Now, we're not going to grade the reboots, because we just want to touch on those.
Yeah.
But He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, the classic cartoon that we all loved and enjoyed.
We all 50% of us loved and enjoyed.
And now we graded the Pop Rocks out of 5 juice boxes, but this is a little bit more involved. So out of 10 juice boxes,
oh man,
how many juice boxes do you give He-Man and the Masters of the Universe?
I'm kind of between a 6 and a 7. There are things that I think are ridiculous. So the question, when we rate this, I want to say, the question is, does it hold up, right?
Yes.
Does it hold up today, and can you enjoy it today even though you're an adult? It's harder to do that with cartoons, so I'll be generous and give it a 7. Am I going to watch it as an adult? No. But can I understand why kids would have liked it? Would I show this to, we don't have kids right now, but would I show this to some kids? Yeah, I think that if you started maybe with episode 1, with somebody who's, a guy in their 7 or 8, I think that they would love it. And I think that they wouldn't care that, I think that they would think it was funny that he got the storm to go into a hole. Yes. And they might be a little bit enough afraid of Deep Dark, but laugh at, when Skeletor's like, He-Man!
Yes.
Those clips that we've seen. And I think that if I were watching it with a kid, I would be like, all right, it's not my favorite, but it's not so annoying that I have to leave the room.
Yeah. I would have to give it 7 juice boxes.
Okay.
A solid 7, I think. There's a few things that glaringly do pop out now that I'm an adult looking back on it. Is it something that I will binge like I would, one of the popular shows we want to watch? No, I'm not going to binge He-Man anymore.
Right.
But as you said, it's solid. There is decent stories. The animation is still good looking back on it.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, the animation, it holds up, if not more so than some animation I've seen nowadays.
Definitely.
And as you said too, the thought that was going through my mind before you even gave your review was, when we have children, I would have no problem sitting my kids down in front of this TV show.
And I think too that the world holds up. It's a cool world. It's cool characters, and that's one of the reasons that people remember it so fondly, and one of the reasons that it has been rebooted.
Yeah.
So that's it. 7 out of 7 juice boxes from both Steve and Megan on the same page, probably for the first and maybe last time. Next, so basically our plan for this show is we're going to be rotating. So we're going to watch cartoon and then live action and then a movie. So next week is our first live action show, and we are going to be looking at Cheers, which I think is the quintessential show of the 1980s.
Where everybody knows your name.
Everybody knows your name, and hopefully you'll know our name too. And we hope that you enjoyed this podcast. Again, my name is Megan.
My name is Steve.
And we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody.